Hello and welcome to Adam Answers Anything. It's been a while. It's been a couple of weeks, and it's good to be back. Welcome to Adam Answers Anything, not because I know everything, but because I love difficult questions. I love wrestling with difficult questions and exploring new ideas and discovering all sorts of things about life and the process. So, if you're joining us for the first time, I just want to say thank you. And it's really good and exciting for you to be here. I'm really excited to dive into our question for today. Um, just a couple of quick notes before we dive into things. The first note is I've been gone for a little bit, and that's for a good reason. My wife and I have welcomed our first daughter into our lives, and it's quite an adjustment. If you have kids or have had kids, you know how much of an adjustment it is. And so that's where I've been kind of the past 2 weeks. I was on paternity leave from work actually, and so I was just at home with my wife, and we were just figuring out what life looks like now and how to take care of our daughter and everything. And it's such a joy. We've fallen into a rhythm already, only after just 2 weeks, and it is it is as everyone says it is, but so much more at the same time. And so it's a huge blessing, and I'm very blessed to be able to have a beautiful, incredible baby daughter. And I was blessed to be able to take that time to spend with her, to like just learn the ropes of caring for an infant and whatnot. And so that's why I've been, and that's why I've kind of just been in the shadows. I had tried to schedule one over my paternity leave, but that didn't really work out, and I didn't really think it would. I don't know what I was thinking, but I scheduled it and it didn't really work out. So then I rescheduled it for today, and then I missed the time for today that I had originally rescheduled it for, which was 12:15. But it's almost 2 o'clock. We still made it. I'm still relatively on time, and it's really good to be back with everyone, back asking some very deep questions about life, and just walking through them step by step. So just two announcements. These are the same announcements I make every single episode that we have. Wait, just let me double check that I turned off the music, because I always forget to leave that on. The first announcement is if you would love to either ask a question, or you would love to be on the show to actually wrestle with a question together, which is what I'd really love, right? Because I spend the show just kind of talking. So I do a lot of talking constantly. And so I'd love to hear you talk. I'd love to hear you wrestle a question on the show as well. But if that interests you, go ahead and scan that QR code. And the QR code is going to take you to a form where you can input a question that you perhaps would love to see an episode focused around. And there's also an option to say, yeah, I'd love to be on the show to wrestle with this specific question together. So I would love to hear from you. I would love to hear your questions, and I would love to have you on the show to wrestle with them and through them together. The second thing is um, if you have a perspective, which I hope you do, on any of the questions that we discuss and cover in any of the episodes, feel free to leave a comment down below. Leave a comment in the chat if you happen to be watching this live. I would love to hear what you have to say, what your thoughts are on any given subject. And I understand that some of the questions, like especially today's question, some of the questions that we deal with are extremely dense and loaded and heavy questions. And there's no conceivable way that I could possibly cover every avenue of that question in this show. And even more so, it's hard to cover your entire perspective in a YouTube comment. I totally understand that. And so I understand that it could be maybe intimidating to want to leave a comment on a question when you're like, man, I could probably write like a 20-page essay on this question. Totally understand that. But I would love to hear your thoughts nonetheless. If you're able to condense them, I would love to hear what you have to say, because especially if it's something different or something like maybe I haven't even thought of before, which really excites me, to see a question differently. So if you feel led, just go ahead and do that. I would love to hear what you have to say. And again, thanks for joining me today, and thanks for joining me on the, I think, 12th episode. Don't quote me on that. Like I said, it's been a while, so I'm pretty sure it's the 12th episode. It's either 12 or 13. Could be wrong. So you see the question down below. I know you already see it. Um, but before you like, whoa, like he's gonna answer this question like right now, like okay, yes and no. Here's kind of what I'm gonna do because I'm expecting that there's gonna be other parts to this. I'm just coming out of 2 weeks of paternity leave. My wife and I are struggling with life without sleep and just trying to figure out what that looks like. So I don't have a long outline or script for today's questions. Today's question. I do have just like some really shorthanded notes that I've taken. Um, but what I wanted to do today that focuses around the question of does God exist is I want to share this is more of my personal anecdote on the question because this question can summarize an extremely influential, important, and pivotal season of my life. So when I want to say 20 to 23, that season of my life, this question right here can summarize that season of my life. And I went through in those years, I went through an exploration of asking this very question: does God exist? And I went from having no belief in God, abandoning the belief in God, to eventually coming back to the belief in God. And so, what I'm going to do today is I'm actually just going to share with you three arguments that were influential for me. Okay, this is a very subjective episode. It's very personal. Like these are what drew me closer to the idea of God. And then I'm actually also going to share two ideas um, that that kept me away for a while. Two ideas that I really wrestled with. Actually, I did that in reverse order. I'm going to share the ideas that kept me away first, and then I'm going to share the ideas that drew me closer. And so that's what today's episode is going to be. There there certainly could be a second part to this question. I am happy to do a second part of this question to cover more arguments for whether or not God exists, to dive into the responses, the rebuttals to those arguments, and to provide counter arguments, and to dive deeper into the question in a cultural sense, not just an intellectual or scientific sense or philosophical sense, but also a cultural sense. I am happy to do that. I would love to do that. But I would also love to know if you would love to do that. And so, if this episode goes well, and if you happen to enjoy this episode, please let me know in the comments down below. And that will tell me that, hey, we should probably do another part, like a part two on this episode. So that will kind of give me more confidence to know that, okay, part two is probably a good idea. And it's something that I think people are interested in hearing. So that said, um, that's what today's question is going to be about. So it's not that I'm not gonna handle the question. I'm certainly gonna be handling the question. But I wanted to do this at least first episode on this question. I wanted to talk about it from my story, my past, and how this question has played out in my life. So the first thing I want to make note of is the question is, does God exist? What I'm not really going to be getting into is why I'm a Christian. Now, those two things are extremely inextricably related to one another, but especially in terms of my story, they were somewhat separated. Like my journey to belief in God was more of a journey to theism, and Christianity was definitely a part of that, but the Christianity part of my life was there as soon as I came to a belief in God. Um, And so when I'm asking this question, I'm not necessarily going to be like I'm not going to be providing arguments for the Bible, for the authenticity of Scripture, or for the authenticity of the resurrection, which I love to do. I love to provide those arguments. I love to provide those conversations, and I could certainly do that. But today's question is really just basic: does God exist? And like I said, this question was hugely influential in my life. It was a huge part of my life because I had grown up in a Christian home. I grew up in a Christian church. I went to a Christian private school. And when I graduated high school and I left the state, I left Michigan and I went to college somewhere else in a different state, and um, kind of felt the felt the wind of freedom for the first time on my face. Or at least that's what it was. That's what it felt like. I was 19, away from home, finally felt like I could just do what I wanted to do, be who I wanted to be. And boy, did I just start taking advantage of that and started living kind of my own way and just what I wanted to do. And that's what I did. So when I started college, that's kind of where I was. And I wouldn't say it was in the first year, but I really would say it was the second year. So the second year is actually my first year in Pennsylvania. I would say that's when I really started walking away from Christianity. I had started going to school in Pennsylvania, and I just was not interested. I wasn't interested in Christianity, and I wasn't interested in God. And I really, really wrestled with my belief in God because I had grown up in this environment my entire life, just saturated with the reality that God exists. And so my belief in God was like my belief that penguins live in Antarctica. I just I've always been taught that penguins live in Antarctica. I've always been shown pictures of penguins living in Antarctica. So I just assumed that penguins live in Antarctica. I've always been taught that. I've always been shown that. I've always read that. My belief in God was kind of similar. I just always believed in God. It was just a thing that exists. I was always taught that. I was always shown that. I always read that. I was told that. And I just believed in it. And there were many seasons of my life as a teenager where I genuinely wanted to believe. I genuinely wanted that belief, but a lot of that was kind of just encircled by cultural pressure, as well as the expectation of if I believe these things, then I'll feel more socially validated or socially accepted. And that's one of the most important parts about being a teenager, is being socially validated and accepted. Like, you want to be recognized as a person. You want to have your own identity. And so when you grow up in an environment where everyone's identity is this one specific thing, of course you're going to give it a shot to try and have that one specific thing, because you want people's acceptance. That's what matters the most to you. So I went through that a lot as a teenager, but I went to college, especially my second year of college. I, for the first time, just thought, do I really believe this? I mean, I wasn't a teenager anymore. I mean, I was in college, and I didn't really need the validation of other people. I didn't need that type of acceptance anymore. And so I wanted to really believe what I really wanted to believe. I really wanted to know what I wanted to believe. And so one of the first things that I wrestled with when it comes to a belief in God is called a simulacrum. And it's sort of centered around Jean Baudrillard's book, Simulacra and Simulacrum, or maybe I said that backwards. But it's the book actually that Neo pulls out in the Matrix, in the first Matrix movie. It's when he pulls out and he opens it, and there's a little bit of money hidden in the book. That's actually the book that he pulls out. And one of the things that I wrestled with was this. So simulacrum carries with it this idea that in a world where God exists, things will look a certain way. Right? We'll see miracles happen. We'll see God working in people's lives. We'll see prayers answered. If God exists, the world will look a certain way. But if God doesn't exist, the world by default doesn't look that way. And so the question is, how do we know if the world looks the way that it does because God exists, or because we've made the world look as though he exists. I'll try to just simplify that, just make it even more simple. My ingrained, and I think this came from my upbringing, this kind of just stemmed from my story as I grew up. I had been so used to living in a world that was just completely saturated and inundated with the belief in God, that just God just exists, it's just a fact of a life. I couldn't decipher or dissociate whether or not I was seeing the world with God in it because I believed in God or because God actually existed. It's like if you go ghost hunting, for example. This isn't a question about ghosts, but that'd actually be a really good question for another time. You could go to a haunted house that's it's just an old house, but you're so convinced that ghosts are real. You're so afraid of what's going to happen, or if you're going to see one or have an experience. You're so on edge that your brain creates an environment in which you see a ghost. You'll see a ghost, or you'll hear a voice, you'll see a mist, something of that nature. And it's not necessarily because there's something there. It's because your brain is so on edge. It's so convinced that there has to be a ghost here because you've convinced it to believe that it creates a world in which there is a ghost because it wants to try and reconcile this innate fear with the environment that you've put it in. You're in a haunted house, and that's kind of the same idea behind a question of simulacrum. How do I know that my brain isn't actually just simulating a world in which it looks like God exists? How do I know that's not actually the case? How do I know that God actually does exist independently of my brain's perception of reality? How do I know that my brain isn't just creating reality? Man, did I wrestle with that one. And one of the ways that I wrestled with was the analogy of the cup. And this was, I don't know if I read this somewhere. I don't think I read this somewhere. I think this is just an analogy that just kind of came to me, but it probably exists out there somewhere in the philosophical ether. But if you imagine one of those big old styrofoam cups and it has a lid on it, and you're sitting there and you're looking at the cup, and someone asks you, can you tell me what's in the cup? Well, the problem is you're sitting there and you're looking at the cup and the lid's on it. So you don't know exactly what's in the cup. It's a plain old styrofoam cup. For all you know, it could be just water, or it could be pop, like Coke or Pepsi or something like that. Or it could be coffee, or it could be grape juice, or it could be orange juice, or it could just be a smoothie, maybe. But the thing is you don't really know what's in the cup. You don't really know until you take a sip. See, in the analogy, the cup is like our world. It's our physical world that we live in every single day. It's it's the tangible physical world of objects and things. And what is in the cup is the non-physical world. It's the thing behind the veil. Inside the cup is the thing that we can't see, that we can't measure, that we can't really know. That's the metaphysical. That's the immaterial. That's what Plato calls the eternal. Those are the things that are beyond us, outside of us. And when you open the lid and look in the cup, that's when you've passed from the material to the immaterial. That's when you've gone to the other side, I guess we could say. So the problem is, like, how do you know what's in the cup? If I'm just sitting there looking at it, looking at the cup, how can I know for sure? Right? As Christians, they'll say, well, there's coffee in the cup. I'll say, but why shouldn't I believe that there's orange juice in the cup? And the Mormons are right. Or why shouldn't I say that there's water in the cup? And the Universalists are right. Or why shouldn't there be grape juice? And the Muslims are right. Why why does it have to be coffee? Like, why are these people so sure that it's coffee? And I'm sitting here looking at this cup with a lid on it, thinking I have no idea what's in the cup. That thought, that and I don't know if I don't think it's a thought experiment, but that thought, that sort of mind image, I really wrestled with it. I really wrestled with wondering what's inside the cup. Another hurdle, I guess I should say, another hurdle is the limitations in our lives that we're like, I'm limited in my ability to sense things, to experience things, to know things that are beyond this physical world. We live in a physical world that's based on touch, feel, see, hear, smell, taste. Anything beyond those limits, we can't have a confidence in measuring. We can't have a confidence in measuring with absolute certainty a thing that fits none of those categories whatsoever. And the unfortunate thing is, even in the things that we can see, there's only a minor degree of confidence that those things are accurate. I think that Hume's problem of induction is one way in which this is pointed out. I don't know. Tomorrow I could wake up, hold an apple, let go, and it could just float up for all I know. Even though every single time I've let go of an apple, it's dropped down to the ground because of a thing that we call gravity. There's no reason for us to assume that gravity is going to be the same tomorrow as it is today. Likewise, measurements. The more that we measure something, the more uncertain we are of the thing that we're measuring. No matter how detailed we try to be in our measurement of something, it's never detailed enough. That's why, even though we have sort of a vague, I guess not vague, but like we have an average measurement of the speed of light. The speed of light is never been completely and totally accurately measured. Um, that's why complex dynamic systems exist. That's why chaos theory exists, because in a system that's complex, meaning that it has just an unfathomable number of variables and or vectors or whatever, you can't possibly measure them all. And no matter how hard you try to measure them, that system will always fracture or venture off from your prediction wildly in the future. And that was kind of a struggle for me. I'm like, not only can I really know nothing about this immaterial world that exists, but we're like all of science kind of just hangs on a thread of assumption. Like we have to assume that the universe is consistent in order for us to say that confidently some scientific observation is a fact or is a principle in some way. We have to assume that the universe is consistent, that it's stable, that it's knowable. We have to assume those things in order for science to actually function. So that really put me in a quandary. That really put me in a position of, man, like how am I really supposed to answer this question if I can't even observe it, if I can't even have certain knowledge of it? Then there was a third thing. I'll say there was a third thing because those were two sort of intellectual things that I really wrestled with when it came to the question of God. There was a third thing, and the third thing actually had a lot to do with prayer. I really wrestled with the idea of prayer. And again, this I know I said at the beginning that this is a question that is just focused on theism. So I'm not really going to be, when I'm talking about arguments for God, I'm not going to be talking about arguments for Christianity. This is just theism versus atheism. But the question of prayer actually was a part in my life. It was actually a thing that I wrestled with when it came to the question of theism in general. Um, and I didn't understand, because this actually does have to wrap into the idea of simulacrum, like we just talked about. I didn't really know if my brain would make up a world in which a prayer request was answered. Like I didn't know if my brain was just seeing a situation play out as though that prayer request is answered, or if that prayer request was actually independently answered. Oh, even like, okay, well, that doesn't make sense. Well, I'll try to explain it. Simply put, it's this. If I'm praying for something, let's say I'm praying for my friend's leg to heal. Let's say he broke his leg, his kneecap busted or something like that. And I'm praying for it to like heal his leg, heal his kneecap. And he goes to the doctor, he gets treatment, he gets surgery, he gets medication, he gets put in a chair. Several months go by, his kneecap's healed, and he's walking, he's fit as a fiddle. I mean, I was he healed because I prayed, or was he healed because he saw some doctors that knew what they were doing? I really, really wrestled with prayer. And I think I really wrestled with the purpose of prayer too. I mean, what's the purpose of, like, I'm praying for a thing that's just going to happen anyway, right? Like, that some scenario A is going to play out how it's always meant to play out, regardless of whether or not I pray for it. Like, sure, my friend could have chosen not to go get help, but I don't think me praying for it or not praying for it really actually had an effect on whether or not he went to go get help. He just decided he needed help, so he went to go get help. Again, this is something that I wrestled with when I was, 20, 21. I just really fresh to college and fresh to being exposed to all these questions that I had never really answered or never really asked myself before. So I've walked through kind of three things that I wrestled with. So this is like around when I was 20, I think 21 actually. Yeah, 21 at the end tail end of 21 is when I wrestled with these things. And when I say wrestled, I remember waking up 2 a.m. in the morning with friends doing stuff I shouldn't do. And I remember thinking to myself, is this really like what I'm doing with my life? I had been so desperately and ravenously searching for purpose in my life. And I searched for it in all the places that I thought other people had found it, and I didn't find it. I didn't feel satisfied, I didn't feel peace, I didn't feel comfort, I didn't feel contentment. I felt so utterly restless. And I remember committing to myself that I gotta figure out what I'm doing with my life. And that's when I discovered Pascal and Blaise Pascal, 17th century, um, incredible philosopher. You've probably heard of Pascal's wager. Uh, and he was the first philosopher that I really started reading. And one of the things that he talks about in his books, well, there's this book called The Pensée, which is not actually a book that he wrote. It's a book that his family published posthumously after he died. He lived in this little apartment in Paris where he worked at, I want to say a tax office, but I could be wrong. And he would keep these large sheets of parchment paper on his wall, nailed to his wall in his apartment. And every time he had a curious thought or reflection, he would write it down in these parchment papers. After he died, his family collected all the papers and published them into a book called the Pensée, which just means thoughts. And in one of the sections, Pascal is talking about the very struggle that I was finding myself in. And he says that he looks into the heavens, he looks all around, and it terrifies him. He says, "The eternal silence of the infinite spaces fills me with dread." In fact, that's what I have on my arm here is tattoo. And the reason he said that is because he looked at the sky, the night sky, the complexity, the grandeur, and the beauty of the heavenly bodies, of a sunset, of the small things like plants and animals. He said they're so incredibly beautiful, ornate, diverse, and structured and ordered. And he says, if there is no God, then it's terrifies him. The reason it terrifies him is because everything around him screamed that something bigger than himself had to exist, which made all of the things around him. But if there wasn't, then that's scary to Pascal because there's no answer to his question. There's no resolve to his forlornness. None. And so that's what that quote, the eternal silence of the infinite spaces fills me with dread. And that summed up very well how I felt in that moment. I was terrified because I didn't know what I believed in. So as I began this very long journey, I was introduced to a lot of philosophers, a lot of books. I must have spent night after night in the library. I remember staying in the library until like 2 in the morning. And I started reading things that I hadn't read before. I became exposed to philosophy in a way that I had never been exposed to it before. So, like I said at the beginning of today's episode, I just want to share real quick just a couple of arguments that are influential in my life. So this is right when I was 20, 23 years old, 2023, and this is when this journey began. And along this journey to when I eventually came to a belief in God, these are the arguments that were influential for me. Now, these might not be influential for you. If you're listening to this, if you're watching this and you don't believe in God, you might not be influenced by these arguments. I hope that maybe you'd consider them. I hope that you would maybe look into them, dive into the nuances, you know, take them apart, look at them, and honestly consider them. I hope that you would. I mean, that's obviously my prayer that you would. I don't have an expectation that you would come to the same conclusion I did because, if you're watching this or listening to this, um, you're your own person. You're going to come to your conclusions. But it is my hope and my prayer that in some way, someone who's listening might find these useful as I found them useful when I was 21, 22 in my life at a very pivotal moment in my life. So the first one I'm going to talk about is the Kalam cosmological argument. Now, there's a broad category of argument called cosmological argument. Now, the cosmological argument is just more of a broad things, like things have a beginning. The universe had a beginning, therefore, like things that exist have an explanation for their existence. The universe exists, therefore, has to have an explanation for its existence. That's just the very broad cosmological argument. But the Kalam cosmological argument very specifically was an argument that was revived by Dr. William Lane Craig, who's a philosopher and associated with Talbot, or at least he was. I don't know if he is anymore. But this argument was actually first crafted by a Muslim philosopher by the name of Al-Ghazali, and it talks about the universe specifically, and um, it says that all things, whatever begins to exist, has a cause. The universe began to exist. This is premise two. Therefore, the universe has a cause. Okay, so that's just very basic form of the Kalam cosmological argument. Whatever begins to exist, premise one, has a cause. The universe began to exist. Therefore, the universe has a cause. Now, we could spend hours, possibly days, getting into each and every single one of these premises. But I found it very convincing because this was really the first argument that I had heard from this perspective that I'd never really considered before. And one of the things that the argument I think really puts into question is it causes us to reflect on the nature of being. There's two states, or there's two types of being. There's contingency and there's necessity. Things which are necessary or exist by necessity are things that aren't dependent upon other things for their existence. Some people might say abstract things like numbers are necessary, meaning that if there were no people in the entire universe, there would still be the abstract concept of number. Some people may say that. I think that's somewhat of a Platonic perspective. Um, I think that's possible. Um, but things that are necessary exist within themselves. There's nothing which outside of it which causes it to exist. Contingent things would be the opposite. So this can of Zevia or this pen, they're both contingent objects because there was a point in time where this can didn't exist or this pen did not exist. And there was a point in time where this pen was crafted from the materials that it's crafted from, and it was put together and it was put on a shelf and bought and eventually arrived in my hand. It's contingent because it depends upon preconditions, whatever those conditions are, the creation of these materials. It depends on those conditions for it to exist. Meaning this pen never could have brought itself into existence. Now, contingent things include things like, again, objects like pens, but it also includes things like trees and animals and everything that we see in nature, and it also includes us, right? Because there was a time where I didn't exist, and I am dependent on external causes in order for me to have come into existence. So I'm dependent on my parents doing the thing, and that being successful in order for me to exist, right? Because without that occurring, I wouldn't exist. I could not have caused my own existence by any measure, by any way whatsoever. Now, we can apply this principle to just about anything that we might think of. I can apply it to a river, an ocean, a mountain, all animals, all life, Earth itself, the solar system, our galaxy. In fact, we can apply this to the entire universe at large. We know that the universe is expanding thanks to uh, scientists like Edwin Hubble, who first detected the Doppler red shift, that light from distant galaxies measured over time is slowly red shifting, which means it's moving towards red on the light spectrum, which means that it's moving further away, which is the same concept as the Doppler shift. When a sound of an ambulance comes by, the sound warps in your ear because it's moving. And so as it moves further away, that sound, the wavelength gets longer as it reaches you. And so the sound sounds different than when it's right next to you. Same idea, but with light. And so we know that the universe is expanding, which means there had to have been a point where the universe wasn't expanding, where it was infinitely in a point, a singularity. It was just one point, which means the universe has to have had a beginning. So if that's true, that means the universe itself is contingent in its existence, which means that there had to have been an external cause or causes that brought it into existence. That cause must be outside of the universe because, right, the universe itself, which includes everything in it, is contingent, must exist outside of the universe. And that cause itself must be uncaused. It must exist necessarily on its own will or power. It must have existence in order to be the thing that brings into existence all of our existence. Some would also argue, and I would also argue this, that it must be purposeful. It must have personality. It must have character. It must have creativity, because we don't live in a world with just bland colors and bland structures and bland creatures, right? We don't live in a world like that. We live in a world with an incredible diversity of animals, an incredible diversity of landscapes and mountainscapes and foliage, and an incredible diverse array of planets that we can observe and see, and stars that are beautiful in the night sky. It's an incredibly beautiful world that we live in. And so we could make the argument that whatever this necessary thing is that's uncaused must have creative measure, must have creative expression, must have personality and agency. And this was the first argument that got me thinking, okay, wow, it's really hard to kind of get around this, like, caused uncaused nuance in the question of the cosmological argument. And it was a really powerful argument that started bringing me to the point of questioning how things could have existed cosmologically from nothing, right? So how could have something actually come from the nothingness if all the things that exist are contingent? And some people, like, oh man, I just forgot his name. Some people would argue, I think it's Feynman, maybe, that would argue that nothing, when we say nothing, it's not actually nothing, that there's something in the nothing. Uh, that's a little bit of a stretch. Some people would argue what's called quantum fluctuations, meaning that um, meaning string theory, as a string theories, as strings fluctuate, that universes come in and out of existence, and ours is just one of those many universes, which doesn't really solve the problem, because all it does is just put the problem out just a couple of more questions, because now we're wondering where those other universes came from and where the strings came from themselves. There are a lot of attempted explanations from a methodologically naturalistic perspective. When I say methodological naturalism, I just mean the perspective that all things that exist, the way by which they exist, had to have been a natural process, a physical natural process. There's nothing outside of that. And if that's the lens through which you're looking, and you're not looking through any other lens, this is a difficult question to answer. And there are many attempts at answering it, but ultimately, a lot of those attempts boil down to theorization, possibility, speculation. If you're viewing it as a methodologically neo-Darwinist, if you're viewing it in that sense, then there are a lot of speculations. But this, for me, honestly, was an incredible perspective that I think helped shape me down the right path. The second has to do with proteins. So, and I think I might come back to actually. I might come back to this one. I'm actually going to move on to a second to one of the other ones because this one kind of tail ends the one that I'm about to talk about. So we have protein folding. So we're going to actually take that, put that aside for a little bit, and we're going to talk about information. I picked up a book called Signature in the Cell by Dr. Stephen Meyer. You may have heard of it. Um, it's on my shelf somewhere. I have 2 copies of it. And this book was the first book I read when I became introduced to the modern day teleological or intelligent design movement. I had really never been exposed to it before in this way. I had grown up. No, I want to be really like gracious about the way that I describe how I grew up. I grew up in an environment where I genuinely believed that if you believed and practiced science, then you were a godless atheist. And anything that had to do with evolution was just evil science. And that the universe was 6 to 10,000 years old. And that it was just very clear and plain. And none of science agrees with scripture. That is the impression I had about the world when I grew up. And so when I came into interaction with intelligent design, it really shaped my world because it was the first time I had come into contact with genuine science, genuine scientists who looked at the world differently, who said, wait a minute, the world actually screams God. It screams the nature of God and that God exists. Um, and if we look at it through a different lens, other than just neo-Darwinian evolution, and we start using different paradigms in which to interpret the world, it actually is a beautiful thing. And this book, Signature in the Cell, was the first time I've ever been exposed to that. And to sum it up, which you've probably been familiarized with some sort of form of this argument, but to sum it up very quickly, uh, in the cell is a DNA. DNA. Okay, well, just in the cell, or there's chromosomes. And the chromosomes are comprised of DNA. And DNA is ribonucleic acid, deoxyribonucleic acid. And there's different amino acids, adenine, guanine, thymine, cytosine, uracil. And these amino acids are what form the structure of DNA. And as you probably know from biology class, the organization and the way that these amino acids are arranged, they are arranged in a specific way so that a ribosome, which is another protein, comes along and it reads the arrangement of nucleic acids or of amino acids of nucleic acids. Did I say amino acid? Yeah, of nucleic acid, and then it pumps out amino acids. And after it pumps out this long chain of amino acids, that chain folds and it forms a new protein, and that protein serves a function within the cell, whatever that function might be. So that's what we know from just basic biology. And the very general premise of his book, Signature in the Cell, is that information comes from intelligent sources, and DNA is information. DNA, the DNA molecule, has within it information on the structure of essential functional proteins within the cell. And from everything that we know, intelligent information, or information that serves a functional purpose, only comes from intelligent sources. This is the argument that he's making in the book. And information that doesn't have a functional source, or it doesn't have a function for, that's what I mean. It could be any type of information, Shannon information, but Shannon information is more just like noise. Like if you're listening to white noise, you could argue that you're listening to information, but if you listen to a Chopin's nocturne, you're listening to specified complexity. You're listening to actual functional information. And the argument is that DNA is functional, it's specified complexity, it's functional information. It's not Shannon information, which is white noise. So if I take Scrabble or not Scrabble, Yahtzee, and I have all the alphabet, just a whole bunch of letters and everything into this Yahtzee cup, and I shake the Yahtzee cup and I spill it out, and all of those letters somehow arrange themselves to spell out to be or not to be, that is the question. That's specified complexity. And the argument is that could only happen if someone takes the tile pieces and arranges them in that specific way, if an intelligent agent does that. Now, random, just rolling out, right? Just putting them in a little bowl and rolling them out, that could produce what we would call Shannon information, which is just a bunch of A's and B's and F's and G's and I's random all over the place, but it's not specified complexity. It's not a specifically complex arrangement of those letters that produces a functional, meaningful sequence. And so that's what Stephen Meyer talks about in this book, Signature in the Cell. And it just blew my mind. I'm like, whoa, like, wait a minute. You're like, wait a minute. I thought all of science was like just wrong. Like all of science is wrong and evil and wicked. That's what I thought. And for the first time in my life, I realized, like, wait a minute. If God exists, okay, because I was still at an if point in my life at this point. If God exists, well, then he he made the universe, and if he made the universe, then why wouldn't he make the universe in a way that we could know it or understand it? It's almost like if I go to an art gallery and I look at a famous painting, whether it's a Degas or Michelangelo, and I'm staring at this painting, there's a meaning behind the painting, right? There's purpose behind it. The artist didn't just throw it. It's not okay. Modern art. I don't want to get into that. I actually did an episode on what is art, if you're interested in my perspective. But he didn't just Michelangelo didn't get up there and was like blah 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 blah. Okay, well, what does it mean? Michelangelo's like nothing. Like it's just I just bunch of stuff that I put together. It doesn't really have any meaning. You can't really know anything about it. No, he didn't do that. He made something very specific and very meaningful that we can look at and be in awe at and also know something about. We can know what it's telling us. God is just like a painter who painted the universe, and he made it in such a way that we know what it's telling us. And so that revelation just blew apart my mind. I'm like, wait a minute. If God made if God does exist, he made the world and the universe and everything in it, then like we should be able to know it, right? Because of the kind of God that he is, or at least says he is. So that shifted my worldview. Thinking about DNA and thinking about information and how, for example, there's information in we talk like when we talk about embryonic morphology, um, when we talk about reproduction, where does the information come from that tells um, that tells the cells to differentiate in this specific way, right? Because we're talking about cells, that cells form tissues. In reproduction, what tells the cells that, oh, you're going to be a liver cell, you're going to be a kidney cell, and the cells just divide in such a way that they just they begin forming their own structures, internal system structures. How do they know that? Like, how do they know to form those things? How do bodies know what stages of development are? Where does that information come from? Where does the information come from that says that a cell is a whale cell and not a monkey cell? Where does that information come from? This whole just information theory really revolutionized I would say it revolutionized my life more than the cosmological argument, because of how it just shook my worldview on science. Because I just thought science was all of one thing. And then I began learning about the history of science. Began learning and discovering that that Darwinism or neo-Darwinism has Christianity to thank. That it's because of Christianity that we eventually got neo-Darwinism, or the philosophical thought, which is mechanistic philosophy, which is a precursor to the way that neo-Darwinism works. We have Christianity to thank for that, which is like another thing that blew my mind. And I started to become very Augustinian in my view, just seeing nature as like, well, if God exists, then why would he make nature in such a way that that we're wrong? Right? Why would it lie to us? Right? Like if the earth isn't that old, why would it lie to us and say that it is? Um, that's another thing that we can get more into later. But uh, back to information. Another thing that really was really impactful. I think this was as far as intelligent design, I think this was the argument that was like, bam, like it influenced me big time. And it's this: Dr. Douglas Axe, who's a really great guy, wonderful guy. I've met him several times. He talks about in his book, he talks about protein folding, and what he wanted to know is how many ways can you fold a protein and have that protein non-functional. So this is what he means. When a ribosome is reading the DNA molecule and it pumps out these amino acids, these long chains of amino acids that are joined together by peptide bonds. Some of these chains are very, very long. We're talking about like thousands of amino acids long. Some of them are very simple. He said, let's say we have an amino acid chain that has just 150 amino acids. Very simple, very non-complex, which by the way is like not usual. Almost all proteins are much more complex than 150 simple amino acids. Well, let's say we have this amino acid chain. How many ways can it fold? Remember, folding amino acid chains is what creates functional proteins. How many ways can it be folded so that it doesn't form a functional protein? And how many ways, right, does it fold to fold one functional protein, which is just right one? He found out that it's 10 to the 77th power possible ways that you can fold a protein in such a way that it forms a non-functional protein, which means it doesn't function at all. It doesn't do anything. That number is mind-boggling. 10 to the 77th. In other words, what he's saying is that to have a functional protein and to have that protein folding by random chance, right? So again, I have a long chain of amino acids in a Yahtzee can. I'm shaking it, rolling it out, random folding sequences. He says the chance of it producing a functional protein is 1 in 10 to the 77th power. Yeah, let me just help wrap minds around that a little bit. That number, there are less known atoms in the known and observable universe. Atoms in the universe, less than 10 to the 77. Less than 10 to the 77th. In fact, if you measured every single second since what we would consider the beginning of the universe, right? Even if it's 7 or 14 billion years, there's not enough seconds in the history of the entire universe for 10 to the 77th. There's not even enough Planck seconds. Planck is the like smallest measurable amount of time, just like a Planck is also the smallest amount of like measurement. It's also the smallest amount of measurement of time. But there's not even enough Planck seconds in the history of the universe to cover a combinatorial space as large as 10 to the 77th power. That is mind-boggling. And the reason why that was so mind-boggling to me was if 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 random mutation and natural selection, especially random mutation, is the only mechanism responsible for life, it is so highly unlikely that it would have found one functional protein fold that to to think otherwise, that there was nothing else involved, seems more magical than the alternative, if that makes any sense. It was so unfathomable that it seemed to me that it takes a greater belief in magic and wizardry to believe that random mutation is the only mechanism at play than it does to consider that there might be other mechanisms at play other than just random mutation. So that's Doug Axe. Highly recommend you looking into his work. Incredible book, incredible work that he did. Um, and that concept also folds into the idea of fine tuning, which was another huge concept and argument that impacted my life. Fine tuning. And we talked about this actually, I think in last episode, we talked about it a little bit, maybe it was 2 episodes ago, but how all of not just the Earth, but the solar system, the universe, or the galaxy, the universe, everything exists in such a very specific way that if it didn't exist in that specific way and it was off by a fraction of a degree, then highly advanced intelligent life would not be able to exist on Earth like it does. I mean, like the strength of the weak nuclear force, the strength of the strong nuclear force, the strength of gravity, the strength of the speed of light, or the composition of the Earth. Right, the fact that Earth has a liquidy core with tectonic plates, the fact that Earth is in the galactic habitable zone, which means it's from the perfect distance from the sun in order for life to be possible to exist. It's neighbored by several jovial planets, giant planets, that actually deflect and absorb most of the asteroids that could have impacted and destroyed Earth. Um, even to aspects of the the position that our solar system is within the spiral rings of the Milky Way galaxy. It is in the most optimal, perfect position in order for us to be able to observe, know, and record the universe. What I'm trying to say is this: if our solar system was in any other portion of the Milky Way galaxy, the night sky would be less observable to us, and we would know less about the universe because of it. Like if it was closer to the center of the Milky Way galaxy, there would be so much light pollution from stars that we wouldn't even be able to see beyond the Milky Way. So the position of the solar system is finely tuned. It's incredible and amazing. Where it's the fact where it's located. Even the Milky Way galaxy within its local cluster of galaxies is so nuanced. It's mind blowing, which also adds to the argument that whoever put us here wanted us to make discoveries, wanted us to see the universe, and wanted us to actually make discoveries and come to knowledge about it. So that's fine tuning. It was another thing that really, there's all these incredible parameters that have to be very specifically fine tuned, and if any one of these parameters is off by a fraction, then complex intelligent life would not have been possible on Earth. And they're still discovering these parameters today. They're still discovering them. And it's just mind blowing. It's incredible. And it's wonderful to think about. So these are some of the arguments, honestly, that really convinced me. They're the arguments that led me down just this path of realizing that I live in a world that's knowable, understandable, it's diverse, it's beautiful. It's like an artist and a builder came together and made the thing that we live in. And if God doesn't exist, then I have no idea how to explain the order, the beauty, the incomprehensibility, but also the knowability, I don't know if that's a word, of the universe. And so that's what led me to a belief in God, to surrender to a belief in God, to say that, like, principle of sufficient reason, or also just, we could even say Occam's razor, simplest explanation is the best one. That the explanation which satisfies the most questions and the most open-ended observations is that something exists which is greater than ourselves, which sustains and holds all things in his hands. And that's what I came to. And so, does God exist for me? He does. And I recognize that there are millions of people that don't believe that. And yeah, that breaks my heart because I wish they could see the beauty, but also I know that they see the world very differently from me. Maybe you see the world very differently from me. And if you do, I love to hear how you see the world. Tell me how you see the world. If you're listening to this and you don't believe in God, leave in the comments. Tell me some of the most convincing arguments for you for why you don't believe in God. Because I'd love to hear those. But if anything, my prayer and hope is that somebody listening to this, somebody maybe watching this, maybe benefited from it. And if you did, I would be happy to answer more questions. I'd be happy to dive into any one of these arguments even further and to break them apart and just to see how incredible the world that we live in is and incredible the creator is. So I'm Adam, and that's been the 12th episode of Adam Answers Anything. Thanks so much again for joining me. I hope you all have a wonderful and incredible night. God bless.